Dear brothers and sisters, let us continue the book reading Reality at Dawn, written by Babuji Maharaj, chapter Religion. Worship of gods and deities in various forms is a crude development of the same Sakara theory. Worship of every power of nature and even of mountains, rivers, and trees is a further degradation of the same view. What a pity! Instead of worshipping the master, we are worshipping the servants, ignoring the master entirely, and we are not prepared to hear even a word against our set prejudice. The result is that today we find so many sects and creeds, each worshipping its own god or goddess in its own particular way. Evidently, the goal before their eyes is not even liberation, but in most cases, deliverance from some particular form of misery or some material gain. People are driven to such forms of worship either by the force of circumstances or through the faulty guidance of those who are themselves quite in dark in the matters of self-realization. Lord Krishna has made it clear in the Gita that worship of gods may lead you at the most to their sphere only, which is a limited one and far below the point of liberation. They themselves have no capacity to go beyond. The approach of their devotees beyond this point is therefore out of question. Thus, it is evident that these gods and deities are of no avail to us if we really aim at reality. I have illustrated the point more clearly in my book Efficacy of Raj Yoga. Here, Babuji Maharaj is clearly telling us what is the after effect of worshipping gods and deities. This worship of gods and deities in various forms is a crude development of the same Sakara theory, that is, worshipping God by giving him a form, and also worshipping of every power of nature and even of mountains, rivers, and trees is a further degradation of the same view, that is Sakara theory, because many people will worship the different powers of nature and even they worship the mountains, rivers, trees, etc. This is also a further degradation of the same Sakara theory. So that's why Babuji Maharaj is saying that what a pity. Instead of worshipping the master, that is God, who created this entire universe, we are worshipping the servants, that is the power created by him in the nature and even some of the elements of the nature like mountains, rivers, trees, etc., ignoring totally the master, that is Almighty God. We are worshipping his servants. Really, it is a matter of pity. And further, what he is telling, such people are not even ready to hear even a word against their set prejudice. As a result of this, today we find so many sects and creeds. Each are worshipping its own god or goddess in its own particular way, and also different shapes also they have given to it. So for them, The goal before their eye is not even liberation, but in most of the cases, they want to come out of some misery, or they want to overcome some misery, or they want to gain something, that is a material gain. So they are worshipping these many gods and goddesses or deities. And even people are sometimes driven to such form of worship due to the circumstances what they are undergoing, and also by the faulty guidance of such gurus or so-called gurus who are very much dark in the matter of self-realization. So they themselves don't know about God, or they have not even realized God, but they will teach everybody different ways and means of worshipping God. That's why Lord Krishna has made it clear in his Gita that worship of gods may lead to you at the most to their sphere only, because gods, goddesses, deities have their own sphere. They have the limitations. So if anybody worship them, then one can approach or one can progress up to that sphere only. So their progress is limited to that sphere only. And the point of liberation is very far away for them. That means the sphere where they are going to be there is far below the point of liberation. As gods and goddesses or deities do not have the capacity to go beyond their sphere. So, if a devotee approaches them or worships them, they too cannot go beyond that point or sphere. If at all we aim at reality, then these gods and deities are of no avail to us. If our goal is something else, then the people can worship or they can go behind those things. If really one aspires to realize God, then these gods and deities worship is of no avail at all. This Babuji Maharaj has more clearly illustrated in his book Efficacy of Raja Yoga. So kindly refer that book for further information. Let us read further. Mechanical form of worship commonly adopted by those hankering after gods and goddesses to serve their worldly ends is also another absurdity. It is no worship at all. They only play the part of a laborer, so to say, and at the close they get their day's wages for the physical labor done. The solid material form of God, entertained by them in the mind and worshipped with faith and devotion, leads to internal grossness, and if the practice continues for a long time, they become more and more solid, barring their approach to reality. The result in such cases is evident to almost every eye. Ancient sages, finding worship of the immaterial absolute a difficult task for the masses to start with, had devised certain convenient means for their uplift. They made a start by taking up something apparent in the solid form, which the masses could easily grasp or understand. Now the things which would be easily grasped or understood were different for different people. Here Babuji Maharaj is saying that the mechanical form of worship commonly adopted by those people who are hankering after God and goddesses to serve their worldly ends or worldly needs, requirements, is also another absurdity. It is an obstacle. It's of no use. It's in no worship, it is no worship at all. That's what Babuji Maharaj is saying. If anybody worships gods and goddesses for the sake of worldly needs or requirements, then it is no worship at all. It is a mechanical form of worship only. It fetches no result. Those kind of worship and the people who are worshipping, they play the part of a laborer. So to say that at the end of the day, they will collect their wages for their physical labor done. So it is also the similar way. And then this solid material form of God, entertained by those people in the mind and worshipped with faith and devotion, it leads to internal grossness. See, one should be very careful. If anybody worships gods and goddesses with certain form, that too with devotion and faith, it leads to internal grossness. And if this practice continues for a long time, what happens? See the danger of this. They become more and more solid, barring their approach to reality. So they cannot approach to reality at all. This becomes a hurdle and they will become more solid. The result in such cases is evident to almost every eye. We can see such people who are worshipping God in cruder form, and they will be so gross. And further, what Babuji Maharaj is saying, then why this has come into practice in our country? The reason behind this is ancient sages found that worshipping of God, that is immaterial absolute, which doesn't have any shape, beyond shape, that is Nirakara, has become a difficult task for the masses or common folk to understand or to start with. So, they devised certain convenient means for their spiritual upliftment. They made a start by taking up something which is apparent in the solid form, which the common people could easily grasp or understand. But now, the things which would be easily grasped or understood were different for different people. So, because everyone's mindset or the level of understanding will not be the same. So, for different people, they derived different means and also different forms. Then, let us read further. For the people of the lowest standard, they adopted something in the apparently solid form, for others more elevated. Some abstract form, example, splendor, light, or any godly attribute was introduced to start with. For highly cultured minds, a subtle idea of God was enough. Thus, it was only for the people of the lowest standard that they had adopted the solid forms such as picture or image, and that too only a temporary measure. When they attained some progress, they gave it up and embarked upon the next stage, taking up a finer form. It is just like teaching writing to a baby, making her move her pen along the prints of letters. After a little practice, the process is given up and the baby is able to write independently without the help of the prints. Thus, the solid form or the image was to be adopted by beginners for a time only, after which they came to the next stage. Besides, the image set up for the purpose was fully charged with the spiritual force, so that those sitting by in devotion and worship gained some of it through constant radiation. Now, persons of caliber having the power to infuse into the image the spiritual force are rare, although the process of prana pratishtha still continues as a matter of mere formality. The result is that the places and images thus charged thousands of years ago have by this time almost lost all their effect, and consequently no practical gain is derived by those going there for devotion and worship. It is, however, beyond doubt that the process was introduced only for the people of the lowest standard with little brain, who could not otherwise devote themselves to the Lord in any way. It is but certain that the practice, if tenaciously followed to the last, defeats its very purpose and does not provide any spiritual advantage. Saint Kabir has nicely expressed the idea in the following lines: पाहन पूजे हरि मिले तो पूजिए पहाड़ ताते यह चक्की भली peace khaya sansar. If by worshipping stone one can reach God, I shall be ready to worship a mountain. But for this purpose, the grinding stone which grinds the corn to feed the world may be better. Here, Babuji Maharaj is saying that for the people who are having the lowest standard of their understanding, for them, such solid forms of worship was adopted. And for others who are little more elevated than them, for them they suggested some abstract forms like splendor, light, or any godly attributes. And these were introduced in their practice to start with. And further, for highly cultured minds, even a subtle idea of God was enough to start their practice. Thus, it was only for the people of the lowest standard that they had adopted the solid form such as pictures or images, or even the idols also, and that too only for a temporary period. When they attained some progress in their spiritual path, then they gave it up and they embarked upon the next stage. So, taking up the finer forms, they left these solid forms of worship and then they adopted the finer form of worship. So, this is very much like teaching writing to a baby. Say, if we want to teach a baby to write the alphabets, what we will do? First, we will give her the printed letters and tell her to move her pen along the prints of those letters. So, after when she gets perfection in that, then there is no need of that printed form of writing. Similarly, after little practice, the process of this grosser means of worshipping God will be given up, and then the subtle form of worship will be adopted. Thus, the solid form or the image was to be adopted only by the beginners, that too for a time being only. After that, they have to shift themselves to the next settler stages. Besides, the image set up for the purpose was fully charged by those saints or rishis with their spiritual force or power, so that the people who sit nearby it or around it with devotion, and if they worship it, they is to gain that divine power. That divine power used to radiate constantly. So then, the persons of that caliber, having the power to infuse into the image, are now very rare. Although the process of prana pratishtha in our temples is still continuous, but as a matter of mere formality. So the people who are having that caliber are rare now. So this prana pratishtha has become a mere formality. And as a result of this, the places and images thus charged thousands of years ago have by this time almost lost all their effect, and consequently no practical gain is derived by those going there for devotion and worship, because so many thousands of years back those places or temples were charged. Now those temples almost lost all their effect. If the people go there with devotion to worship, it's practically of no gain for them. So it is, however, beyond doubt that the process of prana pratishtha was introduced only for the people of the lowest standard, or with little brain, who could not otherwise devote themselves to the Lord in any way, because their level of understanding was very low. If this kind of practice tenaciously followed to the last, it defeats its very purpose and does not provide any spiritual advantage. That's what Babuji Maharaj is saying. So one must have the clear idea about their worship. Further, Babuji Maharaj is quoting Saint Kabir's dohe, saying, Saint Kabir has nicely expressed the idea in the following lines. If by worshipping stone one can reach God, I shall be ready to worship a mountain. But for this purpose, the grinding stone, chakki, they will say in Hindi chakki, which grinds the corn to feed the world, may be better. In those days, the corn flour was ground by that grinding stone, and it used to feed this whole world. So, Saint Kabir has rightly said that if anybody want to worship stone, then it is better to worship that grinding stone which used to feed the whole world. So, dear brethren, think about this important message and also the clarity given by Babuji Maharaj regarding worshipping of God. With this, I conclude today's satsang. Let us know more aspects in the forthcoming satsang. Till then, I take leave. Pranams. Namaste.